dear historians, and welcome to lesson 6 from our Mafia topic. Because this lesson is quite big, we've split it into two halves, so this is 6A, which is going to be all about Prohibition, and then 6B is going to be about another case study looking at the life of another Mafia gangster. In this case it's the life of Al Capone. So our learning intention for this particular PowerPoint and for this lesson is to basically take a closer look at Prohibition, which we had mentioned when we were talking about Lucky Luciano, but we're looking at this in a wee bit more detail with this lesson. 2 success criteria points. You want to be able to explain why the Prohibition Act was introduced, so why did they bother doing it, and the second one, you want to be able to describe the impact it had on America, and we're going to practice 2 National 5 inquiry questions to make sure that we can meet this success criteria at the end of the lesson, and that's going to be your assignment for this week, or at least for this part of this lesson. So, anywhere you're taking your note, in your jotter, wherever you're doing this, you should put the heading Prohibition and then move the video on to start the lesson. So just as a wee recap and a reminder, when we were talking about Lucky Luciano, we did show this picture, and you can see this picture where we've got 2 men under the kind of watch of police and probably the mayor or someone important here. We can see them pouring barrels of alcohol, I think it's possibly beer or something similar, down the sewer and into the drain. And this was because we said that alcohol and things like that were prohibited, hence prohibition, and you weren't allowed to have them. So we're going to look at this in a wee bit more detail for this lesson. So between 1920 to 1933, Prohibition was a national-wide constitutional ban in the United States on the sale, transportation, importation or production of anything alcoholic. And it came under a legal act called the Volstead Act. The main reason why it was introduced is because of a long campaign that had been started by a group called the Women's Christian Temperance Union, who were formed in roughly about 1875, and they were joined with other groups like the Anti-Saloon League in 1895 and others like that, who were really very much against alcohol being allowed to exist within groups of society. And the main reason for this was because they genuinely did think that alcohol was one of the reasons why a lot of people lived in poverty. They thought alcohol was responsible for a lot of marriage breakups, for a lot of crime, for disruption to jobs and industry when people turned up hungover or were still drunk or things like that in jobs. And they genuinely thought that the best way to actually deal with what they saw as the main problems and the main evils of living in America at this point in time was to get rid of alcohol, and that was the kind of the main thing that they were trying to do. Really well organised group, really well funded, a lot of powerful politicians and things behind them, because what they said seemed to make sense based on the people that they interviewed and all the resources that they had. They were showing that these people had actually lived quite a good life until alcohol had ruined it. So they had quite a powerful amount of propaganda and things behind them, and the campaign pretty much did convince a lot of people in the United States that alcohol was the root of all of the problems. So the Volstead Act was passed to prohibit alcohol to try and tackle this. As you can see here, this is one of the kind of propaganda pieces where you see the Prohibition Party, which is the big arm here. The vote that they have to get rid of it represents this knife or whatever it is that they're using here, and this is kind of like this monstrous thing, devilfish is what it's referred to as, where you can see gambling, partnership with thieves, political corruption, the saloon, you can see defiance of the law, trafficking girls and things like that, all these horrible things that they thought were happening, and they're obviously stabbing it, killing it, which is the representation of what Prohibition meant. They were getting rid of these problems. Again, things like this. They argued that during a piece of sort of time that all of this was coming in and was purposely attacking and destroying society, causing poverty and crime, making people poor, against progress, waste and ruin would basically then follow. So again, trying to encourage people to be against alcohol in all forms. And then you've got this idea of prohibition dancing along with all of these other criminals. So some of the people that hit back against prohibition argued that all this would actually do was give the people like the gangsters, the bootleggers, the racketeers, the mafia people more say and more power in the United States if they were allowed to continue with this. So that's what this one represents. So there were some people that were against it. So first main task that you're going to do with this is you're going to create a table, and we're going to use some slides to fill in the table as we kind of go here. You're going to need 3 columns. You're going to need causes of prohibition, the impact of prohibition, and then just other facts. And we'll fill it in using the next kind of slide. So it might look something a little bit like this. So you've got causes, impact, and then other. And then we're going to fill in this with the next couple of slides. So pause the video maybe for a minute or two, set up your table, make sure you've got enough room to fill it in, and then use the next couple of slides to do that. You're going to need to either, if you're using the video to do this, pause it on each of the slides so that you can actually see it, decide where it goes and copy it in. Again, you can shorten it if you want to while you're doing that, that's absolutely fine, just make sure you've got enough of the detail. Or you might want to use the actual cards themselves, which will be in the file section of the team, so you'll be able to download those and use those, whatever one you prefer while you're doing that. Okay, so our first card says the Volstead Act was passed in 1919, making it illegal to make or sell alcohol in America. So you have to decide whether or not this is your first column, second column, or third column. It is a fact about it when it was passed, but it isn't either a reason for it or an impact of it, so this would be going into your other column. So we just put an O on that one, so that would be in the last column of your table. Second card, America was a very Christian country. Many Christians linked alcohol consumption to sin, including gambling and prostitution. So I would say that that's probably a good example of a reason for prohibition. So your first column, cause of it. Okay, and again, you're looking for kind of key bits of information into this one. So it would maybe shorten this and just say America was a very Christian country. Many Christians linked alcohol to sin or sinful things. So that's just our key point we're putting in there. Again, either pause the video to write it in or go back to the actual full set and use that to fill in your table. Our next slide says in 1873 the Women's Christian Temperance Union was founded and called for the prohibition or banning of alcohol. So again, decide, is that an impact, is it a cause, or is it just a fact, and decide where in your 3 columns would it go. It was believed that men wasted their money on alcohol and so financially neglected their wives and children. Is this a key fact? Is it a cause? Think about where it would go in your table and put it in. Those who called for prohibition cited violence by drunk husbands towards their wives and children. So again, is this a cause or is it just a fact? Is it an impact? Decide where it goes in your table and fill it in. The Anti-Saloon League claimed that alcoholism led to idleness and crime. So again, decide where in your 3 columns it would go. Prohibition was already in 13 American states, so it made sense to pass it in others, making it constitutional. Decide where it would go. WASPs, so again, this is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant people. that were the main American groups, sometimes associated alcohol consumption with immigrant communities, and anti-alcohol campaigns played on the prejudice towards immigrants. So they played on the stereotype. Okay, decide where in your columns that one goes. Again, shorten it so it's just the key points that you want, or put it into your own words. A lot of beer was imported from Germany. In the aftermath of World War I, anti-German feeling was running high, so they're very angry with Germany, so they don't want any German imports coming in, so that's another reason. Decide where that one would go. Alcohol-related crimes actually increased during the Prohibition era, so decide, is that an impact, a cause, or just a fact, and put it into a column. Gangsters quickly took over the supply of alcohol. They soon became extremely rich and powerful through bribery and violence, so decide where in your columns this one goes. Bootleggers, smugglers working for gangsters, smuggled alcohol across the border from Canada. So is that a cause, an impact, or is it just a fact? Secret bars or clubs called speakeasies were set up to sell alcohol illegally. They were controlled by gangsters, so again decide, is it a cause, an impact, or just a fact? Many officials, including police and politicians, took bribes from gangsters to ignore the trade in alcohol, so again decide which of your columns is this one going in. Alcohol was just too popular. People would find a way of getting hold of it. So decide where is this one going. Prohibition enforcement officers were supposed to find and destroy alcohol, like we saw happening in the clip from the newspaper. You see them pouring it in, and arrest the traders, but they were very few officers, so there's not an awful lot of them with that job. So decide where that one would go. Again, shorten this one. It was difficult to enforce. By 1929, 40,000 people were in jail for prohibition offences, and 1,360 people had been killed by police trying to enforce the law. So decide where that one would go. People set up secret distilleries on farms to produce illegal alcohol, so decide where that one would go. It was clear that the law had been unsuccessful. It was repealed in 1933, so again decide where that one would go. It was believed that people were too unhealthy. People believed that if alcohol wasn't available, people would get healthier, so decide where that one goes. And this is what we should end up with. So if you haven't managed to fill everything in, or you want to just double check it or correct any, you can use this to do that. Pause the video roughly about 13 and 15 seconds and then just check your table. So we've got the causes of prohibition on one side, and the ones that we've put in here was that America was a very Christian country, and these Christians linked alcohol consumption to sins, including things like gambling and prostitution, so that's a cause. The Women's Christian Temperance Union was founded and called for the banning, so again they were a cause of it. It was believed that men wasted their money on alcohol, so financially neglected their wives and children. Those who called for prohibition cited violence by drunk husbands towards their wives and children, so again, causes. Anti-saloon leagues saying it led to idleness and crime. Prohibition already existed in 13 American states, associating it with immigrant communities. Beer being imported from Germany, and feeling we're too unhealthy for people needed to get rid of it to get healthier. So all of these are our causes of prohibition. So these all explain why prohibition started. This column is talking about the impact. So alcohol related crimes actually increased during this era. Gangsters quickly took over the supply of alcohol, became extremely rich and powerful through bribery and violence. Talk about bootleggers getting it from Canada, the secret bars and clubs, the speakeasies being opened. A lot of officials took bribes to ignore the trade. Difficult to enforce. And a lot of the secret distilleries set up in farms. So these are the impacts of Prohibition. I think there's one or two of these cards that aren't actually on the previous slides, but that's fine. If you've missed that one out, just write it into your table and make sure you've got all the ones that were there. And then finally, this column, we just have our key facts about it. The Volstead Act was passed. The enforcement officers were supposed to find and destroy it, but there's not a lot of them. Alcohol is just too popular, and the fact it was repealed. So this one explains why Prohibition actually started. This column's explaining the impact of it. So what impact Prohibition actually had on America, it's describing these impacts, and these ones are just our key facts. So you might want to just double check you've got all of these things written in, because you're going to use these bits of information for the next tasks. So if you think about what we now know about Prohibition, this newspaper clipping is actually a really nice one that shows you what a lot of people tended to think about Prohibition, about the impact of it. So you can see we've got a Prohibition agent here, we've got a police officer, a politician, going all the way down to these kind of important people, and they've got their hands behind them, which means they're waiting for someone to put money into the hand. So it kind of links in with what we've been talking about with our mafia topic, in that people like Lucky Luciano and others would quite often pay off these people to, remember our expenses things, to look the other way when they were bringing alcohol and things in, so that they could use that to make more money. So the impact of Prohibition really was that crime didn't actually decrease, in fact it probably increased during this point. Again, things like this, dry law enforcement, the altar of Prohibition, and then just the victims and things of crimes. So our task then that you're doing for this lesson are these two inquiry skills questions. So we're looking for explain why Prohibition was introduced, and we're looking for describe the impact of Prohibition on American society. So remember, explain questions at National 5 level we use A, B, C to do, and describe questions are just describing facts in separate sentences for each of the marks that are available. So for explain, we say A, B, C, the answer, whatever you're talking about, the word because, and then your explanation comment. Describe, just separate facts, separate sentences to get your 4 full marks. So this slide's here to help you a wee bit with these questions. Okay, and I've given you the first 2 for the explain question and the first 1 for the describe question. So you can copy those 2 and then finish it off by doing another 4 to get your 6 marks. So for example, financial neglect was a reason why Prohibition was introduced as my answer. Then I've got my word because, and then I'm explaining why. It was believed that men wasted their money on alcohol and so financially neglected their wives and children. The Anti-Saloon League was a reason why Prohibition was introduced, so that's my answer, because they claimed that alcoholism led to idleness and crime. So you're looking for another 4 structured like that, using the table from the card sort that we just did to help you. Remember to structure it in the right way, so name what the thing is, say it was a reason for Prohibition, write the word because, and then explain why you think that. For your describe question, you're just looking for the impacts. So one of the impacts on Prohibition on American society was alcohol-related crimes actually increased. Another impact of Prohibition was, and then using that middle column, you're just looking for another 3 things. So write the first one out and then another 3 things. Upload your answers to the team. Take a photo of it if you're doing it on paper and put it in, or do it on a Word document, whatever's easiest for you. If you've got any questions or you're not sure, remember to check out the videos on how to answer the National 5 questions to help you, or ask your teacher for help, or email, or ask in the team, whatever is easiest.